Because Money is brought to you by the fine folks on Patreon. Not all of them, but the ones that have found our page, which is patreon.com/becausemoney, and donated their hard-earned dollars toward us making this podcast, which is pretty swell. If you're interested, check out patreon.com/becausemoney and, maybe lend us your support. Today, we've got an awesome episode for you. We've got Shannon Lee Simmons joining us and to talk about her new book, Worry-Free Money. We don't do this a lot. We don't often kind of have people on the circuits talking about their new thing. This book we loved so much. Just a game-changing book about money and the real way people deal with it. She's been a financial planner for a long time. She shares all kinds of crazy tips on it. We're going to recommend it like a billion times. We'll link it below the episode, all the things. But if you want to hear us talk to her about why she started writing it and some of the things that came from it and just about her philosophy about money, it's absolutely incredible. So join us in a little bit.
So what do your parents think about your fame and fortune and amazingness?
Okay, well, there is neither of those happening, so they don't think much. My parents about the book, they're super proud. They obviously, like, my mom is a writer. She writes fiction, though. And so obviously having a daughter who got the writing bug and also decided to put pen to paper, aka fingers to keyboards, made her super excited. And she's so proud. Like, at the book launch, I had laryngitis, which was terribly unfortunate. And then so she actually ended up reading for me. And in a way, it actually worked out to be like the coolest part because the book is dedicated to her, and she got to read it in front of like all these people that I like love. And it actually ended up being something like I was kind of glad I had laryngitis because then it was like this neat experience with my mom. So it's silver lining.
Oh, Niagara Falls! Holy moly!
Seriously, that's super beautiful.
Yeah.
So
well, there you go.
Were you a kind of family? Like, did you, as a family, talk about money very much? Like this, I mean, I don't know how to ask.
That's interesting. No. I think I smell what you stepped in. I know where you're going with that, and I think that it's actually one of the reasons I'm into personal finance. So I grew up in a family business with, so like everyone worked in the family business, and my mom was also an artist. So money was a thing in our house that sometimes it was there and sometimes it was not. And so, at one point I was in like private school and there was like very fanciness. And then we lost the business, and then cars were towed out of our driveway and like bankruptcy. And then I was not in private school with all the fancy things. I was young. But what I learned from that, and like my parents are really open and honest about it. And so then, watching my parents kind of rebuild the business all throughout my like younger days, there were always conversations about like money, and not from a stressful point of view, like there's not enough. It wasn't that. It was more like money comes and money goes, and you can't really super get attached to it. And there was, but always hope. And so I think like if you work hard, it'll work out. And I think that kind of like shaped a lot of what my views about money are. Is that like, anything I've done, whether it's like leaving Bay Street to start new school or writing the book, is not done specifically for money. And that's not like, I'm not saying I'm holier than thou. I'm just saying like because I'm not attached to the outcome from a financial perspective. And I think that's because of my parents. And I think that's because they talked about money with me all the time when I was younger. And I knew that like you can live with and without it. And that was a really cool thing that I didn't appreciate until I was much older.
That's so, okay, this is my very typical go-to, is like, that's so amazing. But it's clear, it's super clear when you read the book that is the place that it's coming from, in a way that it has, how some things strike you when you're at a particular stage in life that may not strike other people in a very similar stage of life or with the same background. Like, it just hit at the right time. But I don't feel like that's it with your book. I actually feel like it shines through so clearly in a way that it does not shine through in other books, no matter what stage of life I read them in. That like, look, yes, we successful money. We want all the columns to add up, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, that's in service of whatever it is that life means to you. And I want to applaud.
I agree, and I think it's a tool, right? It's a tool. Like, I mean, this is above a certain amount of money that we all need to have to like, have a warm place to sleep and food on the table, right? So we're talking about the financial and the money part above that, living wage and around that living wage. I think that is something that with my clients and myself is important. It's like, it's a tool and you use it for things, but as long as you're using it for things that are actually filling up your life, like you said, like that are for you and not necessarily because you think you're supposed to have these other things. Because that retirement question I get all the time, like, how much do I need for retirement? I'm sure you guys get it every day. And so that's so impossible to answer because everybody needs something so different. Somebody might need $4 million to retire and somebody else might need 400,000. You know, it's like, it's all about each person individually. And so like if the book or any sort of financial advice that we all give people helps people realize like, hey, you know what, like I feel good about the money and like you can't get attached to the outcome of that. Like I feel successful and filled up with this, even though that person needs that. That's, we've all done our job then.
Yeah. And I think I find that such an interesting thing. You're talking about your parents and about how that kind of conversation that they fostered, this kind of conversation, which is, it feels rare. At least I haven't heard a lot of stories of people kind of having family settings where it's like, we have this open conversation about what's happening, what's the good stuff, the bad stuff, not the fact that and it's not life ending. There's this hope running through it, which is amazing. But that's really, and this comes up in your book all the time, and it really feels like a driving factor that like, we live in this world of uncertainty. You never know what you want. You never know what's going to happen. One of the things you can control, and one of the things that all tools kind of are facing are, how do we have this conversation?
Yeah.
How do we talk about this? How do we talk about it in a sense of this happens? It doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you succeeded. It means both of those things and neither of those things, but that the conversation and figuring out a better way to have it, it has to be a key part of personal finance.
Oh my gosh. If we all talked about money, honestly, I think the world would be such a better place. I don't think that there would be resentment about your own financials. I don't think that there would be inadequacy. I think that people wouldn't overspend. There's that movie, what is it, The Invention of Lying or something. And I feel like if everybody had one day where they couldn't lie about their finances, like everyone would just stick to their budget. Like somebody else would be like, oh, you can't afford that either. Like, let's not do it. And so I think that the honesty piece is huge, and especially with the kids. And that's something that I will implement with my kids. And I 100%, like I said earlier, I didn't appreciate that was something that was just on the table for discussion when I was growing up. I didn't realize how rare that was until I was a bit older. And actually some of the ideas that I got to use with clients that are then mentioned in the book, like, here's what we have and you get to decide, that actually came from my parents. It's not actually something that I have made up. So for example, like it was back to school shopping during lean times in the house. It was like when nobody was getting those Tommy Hilfiger jeans. That was when, my mom would be like, okay, we have $200. I don't care how you spend it, but like whatever you want to get for that $200 is what you have for back to school. So like figure it out. And so it was like this opportunity that if I was like, okay, so I bought like a Little Miss Sunshine shirt and blew half my budget almost on that, and I learned a super important lesson. But like, instead of her saying like, no, that's too expensive, you can't do it, like, okay, like you're going to live with the consequence of that decision. So I was able to still get something that I wanted, and I felt like really cool because I had that shirt and those were really hip at the time. But then I also realized that then like I didn't have much for anything else, and my parents didn't budge. So it wasn't like, oh, you blew your budget on that, and now I'll still have to pick up all these other stuff. They're like, no, you get to choose. And so I think that was like such a cool thing that used to happen. And then, as things normalized a little bit in my household, there was a little bit more given as we got older. I got a part-time job and all that stuff. But like during those like pre-teen or tween years, that's when we were struggling financially the most. And it was really important. And I love that happened. And I love that we talked about that. And with my friends, I'm so blunt about money. I am annoyingly blunt about money with my friends sometimes. And I think that, and I've talked about that before too, like I shock them sometimes because, they'll kind of be like, oh, I got a new job. Like, how much are you making? Are they offering you a bonus? And I'm not being rude. I just want to know because I ask questions about personal finance. I'm interested in like what that means and how we're all kind of, and like, are they being ripped off? Should they ask for more? Do they need to salary negotiate? Like all of those questions. And so now it's like my friends will call me and tell me all of their financial gossip about their own life, which is great. But also I think key to the fact that none of us are, like, when we make plans and stuff, like, nobody had like a Las Vegas bachelorette party for a week, because I think we all know how much everybody makes, and we're all kind of open about that. So I think that there's no room for it within our group of girlfriends, because everyone knows that not one of us can afford to do a trip like that.
Yeah, and to be able to say then, instead of the way that you describe that particular, like going out, the $80 dinner, going out for your friend who you love, but you just didn't want to spend $80 on the dinner. The way that you talk around that is so perfect and so hard at the same time.
Yeah.
Because ultimately it boils right down to, I have the money, or maybe not. I mean, it comes down to shame sometimes, because I could,
yeah,
but
like
I'd
I
rather
could
spend
do
on
this.
something else.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And that's hard. And that's why I say, like, what's important when you're trying to broach that topic of money is you have to say I can't, you have to learn to say no, but like the most important thing is to like say why you can't, and be vulnerable about it. So don't be flippant. What I find with clients, they'll bail on stuff last minute when they don't want to spend money on something. So they'll say yes, 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 and then they'll bail because they don't want to have that hard conversation. Like, well, that's more hurtful, I think. So what I usually say is like, okay, if we're going to have a conversation about this, say what's not happening in your financial life because of this other decision. So like being able to say like, hey, I can do this, but I'm really trying to save for, and at that point I was saving for the wedding, and I was trying to save towards a down payment that I'm still trying to save towards. I was, because like Toronto sucks that way.
Yeah.
And so like I at the time I was hopeful, and I was trying to do this, and I'm trying not to go into debt. And I had, explaining like, these are the things I'm trying to do. I've quit my job. I do not make as much money as you probably think that I do, just because I'm in finance. And like, so spending $80 a night for me is not an easy thing when I'm trying to do these other things. I love you, but is there something else that's possible? And I think that, so the key things that are happening there is like, three things. One, you're vulnerable about your own situation. Huge. Two, telling the person like what's important that's being given up by overspending in your life, right? So this is like family vacations or retirement security or whatever. Like tell that person like, this is what I'm afraid is not going to happen if I keep spending money. And then the third thing is like always ask what's possible, because that puts it back on that person who potentially just got their feelings hurt a little bit, to say, well, what could we do instead? And so you haven't decided that for them. And like, could we go to a different place? Could we try it on a cheaper night? So like, then you let that person kind of like take the reins and like answer for you, so that it's you don't have to feel so guilty and that they don't feel so hurt. And I think if we could all do that, then I think we'd all be a lot happier and relieved more often.
So by accident, I am reading, well, I finished yours, but at the same time, overlapping, I was reading Worry Free Money by Shannon Lee Simmons and Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. And I feel like they can be twin books. Like,
I know.
Here's my sister, Brene.
I know. I actually had someone say, and this is not me being like, I'm not trying to be showy offy, but you're not the first person to say that. And I actually have had a few people say that it's like Wealthy Barber and Daring Greatly had a baby. And I was like, well, that's the greatest freaking compliment I've ever heard in my entire life. And I like wanted to like get it on a t-shirt.
Because seriously, I have never, and I read a lot of people's things. Oh, what a dumb thing to say. I read a lot. I read what people write. And a lot of it is in the sphere of personal finance, investing, all that kind of stuff. And there is a real dearth of material written from an empathetic standpoint. Especially, so I was just before you came on, Chris and I were talking about one of the sections that I hadn't had a chance to be really effusive about on Twitter, quote unquote, yet. Is the section about there was, there's a bunch of times where the numbers just don't fit. But you're not going to tell. And you even use the phrase, I think twice or three times in that section about like, look, I know some people might criticize me as a planner for not telling them, well, just sell your house. But Chris, my friend Chris over here, we talk a lot about the hardest, most irritating, hateful words in finance or in advice, which is just. So just do the thing. And there's so much that is wrapped up in just. It's actually usually a really hard thing. So to say, I am empathetic to your situation. I am not going to suggest something to you or recommend something to you that you clearly will not do. There is no point to that. So here, that's maybe the optimal mathematically, but here's where we're going to sit because this is the optimal behaviorally and for you. And I just think that the people that get to sit in front of you with the attitude that you've displayed throughout the book, and of course I kind of know you in person and really like you as well, I just think they're so lucky to get to talk to somebody who isn't going to chastise them for not making the financially optimal choice every
100%.
single time. I think it's amazing.
And
well, thank you.
it's completely, it's language that's missing, and it's also so silly that it's missing because it's how people actually make decisions, and it's how people actually feel about their life. And what you said before, which it's still rolling around in my head, is just this idea that I'm not attached to the outcomes from a financial perspective. And I think that large swaths of people aren't. But the problem is, or this is an overgeneralization, I think a lot of people that end up in finance are more people that do judge success by a financial outcome. And that's fine. That's not a bad thing. That's totally fine. But there's a disconnect between the communication between people that do and people that don't. And
Yes.
it's such a difficult thing because people are sitting across from you, and then all of a sudden you and your language are using words like inadequacy, and you're using words like safe and happy. And that's how people think. They don't think, they want to know, is $200,000, is 500, is $1 million going to make me safe and happy? Like,
Yeah.
But people want to start from the numbers first because that's what they feel like they should do, and everybody's all confused. And so, like, to start from, like you're saying, building a system, building a way of thinking, and building a structure that's all based around how do you see when you're making a small or a big choice, if this is safe and this is happy. Those are the two words that I'll take them to my clients. I have already, and I take them like they're in my life, just kind of digging to my core. They will be etched on my bones at some point.
It's a planning masterclass.
It's just, it's perfect. Those two words, like that's what financial planning should be.
So
Yeah, I agree. And can I tell you like a borderline inappropriate story about how that idea kind of formulated in my mind years ago?
can you?
Please.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm sure this will make the podcast. So, I mean, here it is. So my mom is like my hero, obviously. And she was like a great mom, and there's so much wisdom that has been imparted on me that now as an adult, I get to like kind of pick apart and be like, man, that was cool. So when she was kind of giving me like the talk, if we're all on the same page,
Nudge, nudge,
she pulled
wink,
me
wink.
aside and was like, okay, so like, this is what's going to happen. This is going to come across your desk at some point, so to speak, right? And you need to, before you ever engage, you need to stop, check in with your brain and say, am I safe and am I happy? And if you are both, then you have my blessing. And I remember my first encounter, which was very lovely. I stopped in my head and went, am I safe? Yeah. Am I happy? Yep. And it was so impactful that it's actually come into other aspects of my life, because you can't just be one in so many ways in your life, right? And so those words and that combination of safe and happy, that is what spurred me on within the financial planning, because it was those two words for me were like so impactful there that I also started using them in my own financial life. And then I also started teaching as a client. So that's my mom's birds and bees talk. And now it's in my personal finance book.
Moms for the win.
Moms for the win.
Right? Moms for the win. It was so empowering and also so secure too. Do you know what I mean? It was like that perfect mix. And like, that's why, and it means something different to everyone else. And I think that Chris, is your point, right? So like,
exactly.
Safe and happy are words that are subjective to all of us. So when I'm spending money, my version of happy and safe is different than yours. And I think that a permission to just allow us to feel what we feel. And if we feel safe and happy, then go for it, is really clutch when it comes to our money.
Completely.
I'm still a millennial. I'm sorry. Sorry.
I guess we'll forgive you. No.
I think I'm a millennial too.
I'm definitely not a millennial.
I don't think you are. No.
How old are you, Chris? Or like, what year were you born?
I know this, 85. And thank you for being sensitive to the fact that I can't do math and I forget what age I am and immediately going to what year was I born. Because I was like,
I'm older than you.
Am I? What am I?
You're a millennial. You're 32 right now, or turning 32.
Yes, that sounds about right. Happy birthday.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Look, I'm a millennial. I can speak the language. I can do it.
I'll just go knit my granny sweater while we're at it.
That's okay. I probably just shamed a bunch of millennials are like shaking their head at me being like, she's still not that cool. So it's fine.
Yeah, well, it's really hard to, we're a big generation. We have many things. And apparently we don't believe just one thing, but that's a whole nother something for another time.
Podcast.
Yeah. It's
so anyways, I'm sorry for bringing up birds and the bees inappropriately on your podcast, but there it is.
Are you kidding me? That's not inappropriate at all.
We've done
That's
worse.
amazing. And we've done far worse. And you very nicely skirted around, kind of like coming across my desk. It was well done. Yeah.
You would have did there.
Nailed it. But you're right. It's the right kind of subjectivity. And it's kind of putting your fingers on the right subjectivity of one thing I wanted to ask you, kind of going back one step, when we're talking about conversation and talking about, how much of a game changer just that increasing that one thing could be. I feel, at least in my interactions with people, that one of the big problems with that is that, and maybe it's a symptom of not having enough conversation, is just the fact that people can't always express that exact trade-off that you're talking about. People can't always express that thing that they want more, the uncomfortability that kind of spikes up of I don't think I can do this, but I just don't like, or just defining kind of that idea of safe and happy, that exercise in itself is something, and this is something your book yet again goes through and kind of gives people tools for that, but it's kind of, it's a difficult thing to start expressing yourself when you don't feel like you understand yourself. Which is hard.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people haven't actually taken the time ever maybe to sit down and think about like, what do I spend my money on that makes me excited, like that makes me feel good and really feel good, not just in the moment good, that long-term versus short-term piece. And I think that like giving yourself half an hour in the bath to like, of course I've just painted a picture of somebody reading my book in the bathtub with like candles and like probably Sade's on. But anyway, so like someone's like giving yourself 5 seconds to like think about yourself in a selfish way, in a wonderfully selfish way, and give yourself permission to be like, what about me? This is my money and I work really hard for it. And what about me? And I think that broke feeling that I talk about in the book all the time is like definitely perpetuated by the idea that, and I hear clients say this all the time, like, none of my money is for me. Right? It's always good. There's always something. And when you start, if you had caught yourself saying that line of there's always something, then you are probably fraught with unhappy spending in your life, right? Like you are probably just spending money for the wrong reasons in the wrong places.
Yeah.
And that's why it feels broke, because yes, you're able to spend money, but you're not spending it on anything that makes you excited. And so there's no hope, right? There's no excitement, there's no hope, there's no optimism. And that's what makes us hate our financial lives, right? So I feel like giving people the tool, hopefully will give them that like 5 seconds where they can just like give themselves permission to think about their money for a second. Like, how do you spend this? A little bit of this or a lot of this is for you, so you can like kind of reclaim that space.
Oh, just even the idea to go back to, being a tween or something and like making your own decisions. The idea that you went down, if there's just not enough to include all the things for me and all the things for my husband and all the things for our kids. If I had agency in going through the list and saying, look, that one that's not really for me. And Seth says, this other one isn't really for me either. And we did that together. That's a totally different thing. It's a totally different feeling. Still, none of it's, I don't get to go do a lot of stuff that's just for me, but none of it's really for me still, but I made the choices for what part, like where that money gets allocated.
Exactly. So you feel like you get a say over it instead of it just being this, if there's always something and money just goes out the door.
Yeah, exactly. Because somebody else spent it on me.
Yeah. And like something like, when I say spending on me, like for me, like getting something for my son makes me happy, even though it's not technically for me. You know what I mean? And so, but it's like, yeah, you're right, Cindy. It's that idea that like I get a say, and I've thought about this, and I'm mindful of, and I hate, mindful is a word that gets tossed around a lot, but I think that taking that minute to just like consciously think about how you're spending your money, and maybe that's why you feel like shit all the time, because you're spending it just in ways that don't feel good.
So to me, the broad thread in this book that it's just kind of complementary to other things I've been thinking about recently, like the last 5 years, is that idea of self-reflection. So not, we know about IQ, right? Emotional intelligence, emotion, and then we've got emotional intelligence, and then there's reflective intelligence. So, and it is something that people need to grow. So the idea that just anybody can sit down and say, yes, this kind of spending makes me happy and this doesn't, Chris, to your point, I mean, some people need to come to that skill over time before then they can say, okay, yeah, that's right, that doesn't make me happy, I've reflected on it, and now I can go use that reflection to make change. So this idea of reflecting on deeply navel gazing is what I call it. So deep navel gazing, not just about money though.
About everything,
I think if we took out the word financial, obviously there's lots in your book that we wouldn't necessarily apply as easily, but that's why I love that you start with, look, we all have shit. And money is the way that we spend money and the way we feel about our money it's all tied up in that. Yeah. And if we can't recognize that, we can't move on to, actually strategically doing things about the money, because it's more about your shit than it is about the money.
Yeah. And it's not about just their shit, it's about our shit. Like everybody's got the thing. It's not that only you do and that's why you need help. Right. It's like no. Everybody equals shit. So like that's a bad formula. Let's take that out. But
rewind.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you guys are swearing too.
Bring it on.
No, I love that too, and I think that, and I thought it was really important to me to keep that first part not like number free, basically, because I wanted it to be something that people were like, this is how I feel. And because if you, and I sometimes even in a client meeting, when you come in and you just start right off with the numbers, it's like, you know what I mean? If somebody is feeling like, if they're feeling unmotivated and they're feeling like inadequate and they're constantly kind of coming up against that broke feeling, it doesn't matter what plan I could put in front of them. It's not going to go down because they're going to default to that kind of like broke overspending behavior, and not because they're incompetent and not because they're stupid and not because they're bad with money, but because that personal financial shit is just still so strong, right? And so, and a lot of our identity is wrapped up in how we feel in our self-worth and everything. So that's 100%. And I still battle it every single day. And I think that's one of the main ideas too, is that like, I for sure feel all of those things myself, and every day, every week, I still have to like, hey, yo, this is making you feel this way, okay? And then I still like check myself, and I follow my own inadequacy influence advice, because it comes up every day. And just being able to recognize it though is part of the power in that. And then I think that the other piece is like, I still, even my happy spending, it shifts from month to month or week to week. So that like navel gazing and that like reflection piece is always got to be there, because what's important to me today and makes me happy, and for you guys, same thing, like maybe 6 months from now, that's not the case, right? So it's kind of like, we just have to know that it's like, I think I said this actually in the book, like it's kind of like dating your money, right? You kind of keep trying and seeing if it's a good fit until you finally find that good fit. And just like any other relationship, some days are going to be great and some days you're going to have to work at it. You're going to be sleeping in different rooms. So like, it's going to come and go. And that's normal and okay.
I think one thing that I've been thinking about a lot, just in the last 2 months, because it's going through that whole end of the year / new year, making plans, goals, stuff. And especially looking at and being like, okay, in the phase of really building a new business and trying to be like, okay, how does this work? What do I want? All these kind of questions that you ask that spur reflection. But it was interesting because I was going through a kind of a planning session on that front. And I realized that I had in my head this idea that there was a thing that I was planning for. And once I got it, then this planning part would be done. Then this reflecting part would be done. And then I was like, oh, well, that's silly. Like, that's clearly not going to happen. But how much is that parallel the same with how people think about finances, and honestly, how we talk about finances? Yeah. You need a financial plan, period. And there's like, oh, when I have that, the right plan, I'll just follow the plan. And then, so it takes all of the onus off of developing the skill of reflecting, because it's not, I just need to reflect until I come up with the plan, and then I have the plan, and then I don't need to reflect. When in fact, plan, the noun, is not the thing. Plan the verb is the thing.
Yeah.
And so if
Yeah.
plan the verb becomes everything, then developing the skill of reflection becomes essential. And it's not just about, this is a period of reflection in my life. It's no, I need to make time for reflection in my life constantly, because my whole entire freaking life is a period of reflection.
Damn it.
Yeah. It's not like every day is eat, pray, love over here, guys. It's an everyday thing. It's an everyday thing.
There's lots of
I love
emotions
that.
in eat, pray, love.
I love the movie and the book. But like, we can't all reflect in Indonesia, right? So like,
100%.
we have to figure it out. And I don't think I've ever actually said what you just, like, I don't think I've ever actually thought of it like that. And I think that it's so true, is that it's like the verb, right? And and that the plan is not the be all end all. It's going to shift and change, and that is super normal.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's so good. So good.
Well, and the fact that what I love and why, you know, when we were kind of talking about you before, I talked about how much I'm going to unabashedly steal from this book to include in my practice, just because there is so much plan the verb in it. There is so much teaching people to say, this is your tool, go back to it and plan with it. You know, the great thing about the hard cap system is that you can take a decision there and change the numbers when your life alters slightly. And I love, like, you can go to the point in the last part of the book where you're like, okay, this is the kind of change that is good to absorb. Here are my kind of like boundaries for saying, like, this is a lot of change. And generally I think that that's pretty dangerous. That I don't think is safe.
Yeah.
This amount, you know, you can do stuff in your system because, and giving people the ability not only to have a thing that they can follow step by step, which is really useful, but to follow step by step and then go back and follow the steps again when things change, and not have to. That's where it feels like, sometimes I feel like our industry and many industries are not interested in solving problems. We're interested in treating problems. And that's maybe another conversation for another time too, but I feel, and one of the reasons I get so excited, and we're talking about how this is really what I think financial planning is, and what I connect to the most, is the fact that this feels like a real attempt to try to cure, maybe a problem that's uncurable, but not just, let's get you through to the next treatment. Let's get you through to the next treatment, but to be like, let's try to make it marketably better and maybe move towards less need for the business.
Yeah. I would honestly love if everybody who, you know, read the book or came to see me or one of you guys, I would be like, wow, that is literally, these are the tools that I need to like make decisions and help myself throughout. And all that we become are just people to check in along the way, right? And it's
100%.
not like, because I think there's nothing more heartbreaking for everyone, including like us as we, the planner, as you know, if somebody has come back after the plan, and things are worse, and they feel like a failure, and we feel like a failure, and everyone feels like a failure, and I think that there's nothing more heartbreaking than that. And I mean, obviously, like there have been that's happened to me, and I think that, and I actually talk about that. That's like the Sam and Danny chapters, the downsizers. We just like couldn't, no matter what I did, it wasn't real. Every time what they needed to do was so freaking unrealistic for how they lived their, like for what they wanted out of life. I tried to work within them keeping their house, and they kept coming back with more and more debt. And it was just like, we couldn't plan our way out of it. Do you know what I mean? Like we couldn't get out. And it was just so unrealistic. And I think that is so heartbreaking. And that's when sometimes those major shifts need to happen. But I would love it if like, you know, that kind of failure was something for everybody that was few and far between, right? Like only in extreme cases are we in situations where that's kind of happening, right? Because if people have the tools to kind of navigate daily life in a way that makes financial sense and also like doesn't feel like all they do is budget all the time, and like they feel that constant fear and scarcity mode, then when we do see clients, they should be moving forward and positive. And yeah, like I said, like we're just a check-in to make sure that like, yes, you're on the right track. Yes, validating your assumptions. Yes, we're doing like that. To me is like would be phenomenal.
Yeah. Look at that. We've solved it.
We solved it, guys. That's it. Everything's done. Industry shift now.
Industry. I can hear it. I can hear it shifting. That's why it's
like
such a
Inception.
rubbish in Toronto.
The winds of change. The winds of change. Started here, folks. It started here.
Market.
Oh man, market. Yeah. The one other kind of question that I had bouncing around in my head, and you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but you know, in light of kind of the industry changing, Sandi and I have talked about this a bunch, but
Yeah.
in kind of the world of conversation and kind of the need for open conversation, and the strength of that, I've always, one of the things that I constantly trying to think about is what that balance is from a planner perspective, and kind of showing vulnerability, telling the stories of your own shit and your own life and your own stuff, and balancing that kind of what is the responsibility, and kind of what are your thoughts on kind of I am fairly allergic to the word expert, but we'll just say like experts within the field, who, how can I don't know. I think that there's a question in there somewhere, and I just can't like put it to a fine point, but
is it about being vulnerable with your own stuff? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, I guess it's about being openly vulnerable about your own kind of this thing, that the struggles that we're facing all the time. And Sandi and John and I constantly kind of come up on conversation with, even within this podcast format, where we're like, we don't, like if you're talking about a thing, we're like, I know how to talk to somebody else about this, but at the same time, we're all so struggling with it. And so these things are happening at the same time. And I feel like it's so important that people are aware of that. But it's really difficult to me to express that the two things are separate, just because there are giant questions that I'm trying to figure out in my own life. And I would like you to be part of that. And at the same time, there's still value in me getting to look at yours and having, it's balancing like this still being seen as a I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have started asking.
I know. No, I know exactly. I get it. I think I get what you're saying. It's like the do as I say, not as I do kind of concept. That IKEA story was a hot topic of debate as to whether or not it should go in the book, because in the first opening chapter, I talk about how I can't afford a damn couch, and what kind of personal finance planner who owns her own business can't afford an effing couch. I basically just told every reader who doesn't know me and who isn't like a super Shannon fan, so somebody random who picks up the book, that I don't make a lot of money, right? That's what I just said.
Yeah.
And so if you're someone who's picked up a personal finance book and you want solutions on how to build wealth and get rich, and you read that as the first story in the book, you're going to be like, why do I listen to this thing? And so that was scary and a huge piece of debate. And I was like, no, I want it in there because it is so real. And also, I don't care if somebody thinks that they shouldn't listen to me because I don't make so much money. Like, I don't care. I'm going to put it in. And so my editor was like so supportive and amazing. But like, it was definitely something that was like, we talked about it a lot because of that exact problem that you're talking about, Chris, is like, how does the expert share vulnerable moments in their own financial life and still be considered the expert? It's like the nutritionist who is caught eating McDonald's, right? Like, how do you navigate that? And I think that honestly, everyone's human, and I think that it's all just fear that someone's gonna find. It's like we have our own what's the word I'm looking for? Imposter syndrome, right? So when we admit that we also are dealing with that stuff, we're afraid that someone's going to point their finger at us and say, oh my God, well, you don't know what you're talking about. When like, yeah, I super do. I'm just a human being. Like I'm a human. And I think that everybody just needs to chill. And I know that sounds really like flippant, but I just mean like leading by example. I think that's the number one key. And I think in our industry, if we want people to do all the things that we just talked about, which is like share more, talk more, deal with their personal shit more, then we need to lead by example and say, hey, I can help you. here's why. And I think that in fact, sharing your own personal struggles might even make it more relatable. And you might even find that people are, I have found this, that they're like, oh, you get me because you've been there, right? Like you're not in some ivory tower or whatever you want to call it, right? And so hopefully that's the thing. And anyone that would, I came to the conclusion with the Ikea story that anyone who would shut the book is not a person that should read this book anyways, because it's really not going to give them what they want.
Yeah.
Right? Like if they're looking for a story, a book that's going to give them 7 ways to get rich by the time they're 40, they're going to hate this book. So that's actually what we landed on, which is like, it's actually a really good, like, what's the word? Like a bouncer or whatever the word I'm looking for. Like you shouldn't read the rest of this book if you're put off by this IKEA story. And so that's why we ended up keeping it in.
To go back to Brene Brown in Daring Greatly, there's that whole chapter about like, okay, so she is studying vulnerability and shame. How vulnerable should she be to her audience? Well, not 100% invulnerable, but so her rules for that are, she has to have worked through it already. So like the IKEA story, what has come out of that? It's not that you're now perfect, but you've worked through your issues related to that. That's the whole point of that story, is this is how I worked through those issues. So it's not like, what's an example of something? I can't even think of something. I'm sure I could if I had a little bit more time, but not something that you're actively still in the middle of all the angst about, but something that you've had time to go through it and reflect on it and come out the other side. That's all that I think to me is free game. And I'm queen too much information, but
false.
No, I agree.
Okay.
And I think that and sharing that is just so important, so that people are like, you've been there, and now you can empathize with me, right?
Yeah.
Well, because the expectation is, or that was always my expectation, is that if I hand over all this information about myself, about the life that I want, and for me, the markers of success, which are not the same as lots of people's, that person across the desk, the whole industry is designed in a way to be intimidating and smooth and professional and amazing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the work is that. It just means that I feel like garbage when I open up my box of receipts and I've overspent on something or whatever. And that's people come to us in a creeping kind of guilty way a lot if they don't know us. And that's the first thing that I end up having to do with clients, is say like, look, you're not allowed to be ashamed of any of this. Like, it's done, and now we do something else, right?
Right. And I often say to people, and actually, I don't even know if I said this in the book, but this is something that I find on repeat. I could have like one of those little voice recorder things, just like press play to save my vocal cords. I literally, the amount of times that I need to say something like, what happened even 5 minutes ago? That's in the past, and everything that happens 5 minutes from now, you are in control of. So like, let it go. Whatever it is, let it go, because you cannot, it literally doesn't matter anymore, because I hate the it is what it is, but it kind of is what it is. And so that's what that chapter on financial regret is really about, is like, I also feel like people's shame and guilt and frustration are about things that they have done, and like, it's like that colors the entire financial future for them. And so if they can just be like, it doesn't matter, like it happened, and now all we do is just move forward, and we are in control of it. Like, just because last year you overspent on travel and you're super ashamed about it, doesn't mean you're going to do it again this year. It's not indicative of future performance. So you don't need to do that. And so that's like it sounds obvious, right? Like that sounds like common sense, but sometimes saying it out loud is like, you're right. Like, I am in the driver's seat going forward. And just because those things happened before does not mean that I'm going to do it again. And what I usually find is that whatever has happened in the past is like, they just think they're bad with money. That's really what it is. They think they're bad with money. And so they use all of that stuff as proof of that story for themselves. And then it kind of like opts them out of being able to have to get it together, get their shit financially together. Because they're like, oh, well, I don't have to try hard at my finances because I'm bad with money.
I'm bad at it.
Because of X, Y, Z. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I never, like, I'm just not that person. I'll just never be that kind of person.
I'll never be that person. Exactly. And then it's just easier to give up.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Okay. We don't ever do this. This is not a thing. We just don't do this ever. But I categorically, and I'm just going to draw the boys in with me because I think they agree with me. I'm not blowing smoke. This book is something I think I want everybody to read. I can't, if somebody said, well, who should read this book? It automatically is everyone.
Yeah.
I've never come across an advice book that is so fantastic and so universal. So I think everybody needs to buy Worry Free Money by Shannon Lee Simmons, and that's not something that we do lightly around here.
No, 100%. We're completely allergic to
like making me a bit verklempt.
Yeah, well, because we like you. No.
No,
Thank you.
Everything Sandi said is completely true. It's such a it makes you think at every page. And yet again, this is the stupid thing where I start to talk in like reviews, and I'm like, no, that's a thing I've read that is actually true. And really, really great. And it was one of those books that not only gave me so much inspiration with how to work with people, but it immediately made me want to incorporate a ton of these things into my own finances.
True.
Systems that I've had for a long time. And I was just like, no, that's such a simpler, easy way, a clear way. So it's to deal with it and to kind of deal with it on a day-to-day level. So it really is, it's a wonderful book.
True story.
Thank you.
You're the best.
I'm so flattered and touched and not to sound trite, like honored that you say that. Like it's this book has my whole heart. I don't know if they asked me to write a second one. I don't even know what I'll say because everything I've ever wanted to say is this book. And so I'm it's very nice to hear that kind of feedback because, you know, speaking of being vulnerable, you kind of put it all out there, right? And then you're like, well, there's my other child, and I hope someone doesn't hate it. And so thank you very much. So thank you guys for your support. It's so great.
Let's all cry together right now.
Let's all cry together. Yeah.
All right, that's all we've got for you today. If you liked what you heard, head over to iTunes and give us a really good rating. That really helps people find us. That would be awesome. And if you loved what you heard, why not check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/becausemoney, and lend us a little support so we can keep doing what we're doing. I am Chris Entz, and you can find me over at ragstoreasonable.com. I'd like to thank my partners in crime, Sandy Martin, who you can find at Spring Financial Planning, springplans.ca, and John Robertson, who you can find at Value It's Simple or his blog, Blessed by the Potato, which is holypotato.net.